we're going to be in some trouble for a fair few owners that have done the goodwill hunting method.
This increase needs to go through for the owner to make this a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle of life, being a tenant to a property owner to a landlord.
Greg, new data from PropTrack. What would you say if I said to you, unit rents are growing faster than rent on houses?
I would be shook.
Shook?
Jacob, I would be nothing less than shook.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Regional centres like Toowoomba, very surprising data.
Yeah, really
You wouldn't think
surprising. And like on a national basis, year on year, national weekly house rents have increased 10.5%. On average, that's an increase of $55 per week out of people's pockets. But unit rents, this is on a national scale as well, have increased by 17%, which is about $80
Oh, yeah,
per
definitely.
week. That's a lot of money for people.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. When you dig down into those numbers and you think about the cause and effect of it, once again, we've talked about it plenty in our other content about supply and demand, but you also look at city centres, you're not seeing a 4-bed house in the middle of Brisbane.
No.
So you look at the data, you look at people trying to get into Brisbane, get to work, your only option's unit.
That's right, absolutely.
So that inflates your data. But then you also try and bring a parallel back to the Toowoomba region. You could also see that happening as well. Units had a massive surge about a decade ago with every second application being a unit, flooded the market, then our unit pricing struggled for a little bit.
Yeah.
You bring that back to the last 2 years in a Toowoomba market, I think you'd see similar data, even though we're not a capital city centre.
Yeah, I would agree. And what the data from PropTrack is saying across regional Queensland, the year-on-year change for rent in units has been 16.7%, which equates to $75 a week.
Isn't it crazy?
That's a lot of money out of people's pockets, especially when you look at the demographic of people who are living in units. You know, you're not typically having a 4-person family living in a unit. You're having, young couples. You're having, young developing families. So maybe it's a couple who've had their first baby. Maybe it's a couple who have downsized into a unit. Like, that's a lot of money out of their pocket that they can't allocate then to savings. They can't then allocate to trying to build their wealth for the future. It has a massive flow-on effect for the rest of the economy as well.
Absolutely. We can get focused on the effect of the tenant, but it's also a very necessary part of the economy that these prices do rise, because the holding cost and the acquisition cost of these assets are not getting cheaper for any investor. And it's actually bringing in line the unit yields probably to where they need to be, because they've been an underrepresented asset for some time now. So it is a realignment of yields, which is really important to an investor base, because if we lose that investor base, I dare say the government's not picking up all these assets and providing reasonable housing.
That's
so we need to
absolutely
make
right.
sure the investor's protected.
Yeah, and I think, property managers are often pitted as the bad guy to say, you're increasing my rent by $75 a week, I'm going to move out, and there's that threat there from tenants, and we see it all the time.
Oh, definitely.
And, our property managers cop a bit of that, but the logical explanation, which is hard when you're dealing with a young family or someone who is struggling or living week to week, to say, well, actually, this increase needs to go through for the owner to make this a worthwhile investment. Otherwise, when the hot water system blows up, otherwise when the aircon stops working, they don't have enough money in the kitty, or they don't have the right investment setup to be able to afford those things when that sort of stuff happens. And that does happen all the time, and that's when you least expect it.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle of life, being a tenant to a property owner to a landlord. I think it's 1 in 3 investors in Toowoomba, who are property investors, aren't a sophisticated investor in the sense that they haven't gone out and developed a portfolio. They're actually people that have inherited a property.
Yep.
So we can paint a picture of an investor as some person like a Scrooge McDuck sitting on a pile of cash. But a lot of the time, it's a mum and dad investor whose asset and investment dreams have been owning an investment property, because it is a gold standard in Australia to have an investment property. It's idolised quite substantially.
Yeah.
But they're people that have got a windfall asset gain and have become landlords, and they've gone, okay, well, I'm trying to figure this out. And we're in the middle trying to make it work financially for them, but then also provide reasonable housing to people. So it's a very funny middleman situation to be a property manager in this economy.
Absolutely, and I think it does come back to that yield perspective and understanding the purpose of that property. It is an investment property. It's not a charity property.
Definitely.
So, there are some very kind-hearted landlords out there who, when we make our recommendations, you might say, look, in line with the market, we recommend to increase it $50 per week. And then the landlord comes back to us as property managers and says, look, they're great tenants. I'd like to look after them. I only want to increase it $10 a week. My response to that is, that's fantastic, and I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate the heart and the soul behind that. But at the end of the day, this needs to be a worthwhile investment. So maybe we don't go the full 50, maybe we don't go in line with market, but maybe we meet in the middle and we go $25 per week. And that's a reasonable compromise, I believe. And we can have that conversation with the tenants to say, look, if it went to market, it'd be an extra $50 per week. However, the landlord would really appreciate looking after you, so we're going to only increase it $25 per week. It's that win-win scenario. The owner gets a lift in their rent and an adjustment of their yield, but the tenant also gets a win in not having a full market increase. In some cases where a landlord or a property owner has done that over multiple lease terms and lease periods, their yield could be well behind the 8 ball.
Oh, definitely.
So there's definitely seasons for that, and there's times where that's appropriate, but you can't do it every single time to every single tenant as a blanket rule. Definitely. And say, look, yes, I'm a fantastic landlord. I increase my rents minimal, and then those landlords get to a point where they're ready to sell. They have a chat with us from a sales perspective. We go, look, you're really going to need to move this tenant on. You can't sell it with the tenant in place. Because an investor, an outside investor looking in, is going to look at this and say, this isn't going to make ends meet.
And that's where we've been lucky in the current and potentially outgoing market, where people haven't been doing yield-based offers very often. Whereas if we come back to a more traditional market and people are looking at asset classes and going, okay, well, based off a yield of XYZ, I'm going to offer you ABC.
Yeah.
We're going to be in some trouble for a fair few owners that have done the goodwill hunting method and tried to provide very reasonable housing, which is, I'm all for it, but we need to have a strategy in place for exit plans if we go back to a yield-based offer market.
Yeah, that's right. And you can start to see some of those investors who just work off their spreadsheets and just work off their numbers re-entering the market. It's very early days, but it doesn't take long for those people to come back into the market, and that they cause our sales agents a bit of strife, but they'll cause the owners a lot more strife because of those lower yields sitting on these properties that, yes, have excellent tenants in there, but unfortunately a dollars and cents spreadsheet investor doesn't care about the quality of the tenancy. And I think it's almost like when you stock analysis and you fundamental analysis, really looking at the quality of the company, the quality of the operators, those sorts of things, versus a technical analysis. No, this stock is overvalued at 20 times earnings when I'm not going to invest in this company, but it's a great company. It continues to make lots and lots of cash, so it continues to run but not on a technical basis, on a fundamental basis. So, it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of another, and I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do it, but it's got to be a balancing act. You've got to make the numbers make sense, but you've also got to look after people who are living in the property, looking after it. They control the quality of your asset at the end of the day. So that tenant selection process and that ongoing tenant maintenance process is super important.
Yeah, so very interesting data coming out. Not surprising entirely, but to see some numbers around what a lot of people have been feeling is definitely interesting. In the Toowoomba market, continuing to see historic lows, a bit up from historic lows in all transparency, but still very, very low data, low vacancy rates, mind you. So that's fantastic for investors. Still a hard market for tenants.
Absolutely, and I think you've nailed it there. This stuff isn't surprising coming out, but at least we've got some numbers that we can share with clients and share with the public to help them understand this a little bit more in real terms and really put a number to, look, this is on average how much the rents are increasing across regional Queensland. And I think that provides a lot more clarity than just, look, rents are going up everywhere.